Some movies are based on a true story the same way this candy is based on a true strawberry. In 1997, for example, the movie Fargo was nominated for 7 Oscars and won 2 of them, including for Best Original Screenplay. The story is about a desperate car salesman who hires someone to kidnap his wife and the plan spiraling out of control. And in the very beginning of the movie, the first thing you see is a statement letting you know that this is a true story and all the events depicted have been told exactly as they have occurred. Except they have not. And the Coen brothers who wrote and directed it have admitted that it's completely made up, and the only thing true about it is that it's a story.
This movie was not based on an actual crime.
You know, we weren't interested in making a documentary, and the characters are really inventions based on this sort of outline of events.
That is not to say the movie is bad, it's actually fantastic, but at the same time, it's lying to you, and it's taking advantage of the fact that when you see something labeled as a true story, it adds a sense of legitimacy. It makes it feel grounded, because those are supposed to be real things that happen to real people, and that is fascinating. But when filmmakers are able to claim that something is based on a true story and have no real obligation for any level of accuracy, the line between facts and fiction can often get blurry.
As you know, I've had a lot of people tell my story. I had a great movie director write a film about my life. Most of those very creative people have actually never met me personally. But they've enjoyed telling my story from their point of view.
Let's start with characters. Those can be especially tricky because people are complicated, and to try and boil down someone's entire personality into a 2-hour movie is already a challenge in itself. Bohemian Rhapsody, for example, had a fair bit of criticism for not giving us the full picture of Freddie Mercury, and while unfortunately he's not here to set the record straight, it is not uncommon for subjects that are still alive to be quite vocal about the way they were portrayed.
You feel like you've been mislabeled sometimes, misunderstood. A lot of that stems from how you were portrayed in the movie The Blind Side.
I think it took away the hard work and the dedication that I created from a child. And I think the biggest for me is, being portrayed, not being able to read or write. That weighs heavy.
At the same time, it is also important to say that there is a very real possibility that a negative portrayal is fairly accurate, and the person simply didn't like that, which could be why Mark Zuckerberg, for example, was quite unhappy with The Social Network.
It's such a big disconnect from, I think, the way that people who make movies think about what we do in Silicon Valley, building stuff, right? Like, they just can't wrap their head around the idea that someone might build something because they like building things.
But where it gets even trickier is when the family or even the main subject of a story is involved with the making of a project, because that in itself introduces a whole lot of bias and could easily lead to things like overlooking negative aspects or exaggerating positive ones. During the making of American Sniper, for example, a movie about the US Navy SEAL, Clint Eastwood and Bradley Cooper had apparently met with his father, who told them that he'll unleash hell on them if they did anything to disrespect the memory of his son, and according to him, they promised him not to do that. Although, the biggest problem this movie had was thinking that anyone would believe this baby is real. But anyways, sometimes you cannot even trust if a person really existed, because whether it is for a dramatic effect or to help glue things together in the storyline, the filmmakers resort to inventing a character.
Remember, they have 3 hours, that's a long movie, to tell a life story, so they are forced to collapse certain characters. So, like, for instance, Danny, the Jonah Hill character, he got the brunt of everything bad. Like, man, they put 5 people's actions into one character, right?
And how much of the movie was it actually true?
Most of it was true. Some scenes weren't. What mostly was incorrect was some of the order in which things happened.
I'm kidding, I didn't speak to him, it's from an interview he did. But the point he makes is really important, because the other big challenge of movies based on a true story is to compress down historical events into a cohesive storyline.
There's a tendency, if you're dramatizing a true story, to tidy it up to the point where you actually change the events just to make a pattern. And I really try not to do that. I kind of think that dramas based on real events should embrace the untidiness of real life, and I think the audience probably respect you for that.
In all fairness, life can be messy, disorganized, chaotic, and sometimes just a bit boring, so for the sake of making a good movie, you're bound to take some creative liberties. If we go back to Bohemian Rhapsody, for example, the majority of it is fairly accurate, but some things are moved around for dramatic effect, like Freddie revealing his diagnosis to the band right before the Live Aid performance, rather than how it actually happened in real life when they weren't aware of it until years after that. But at what point does creative liberty turn into rewriting history? I mean, Napoleon never really shot at the pyramids of Giza, and this whole movie in general feels like an alternative universe. Or The Imitation Game, which got fact-checked scene by scene, and according to this breakdown, has an accuracy score of just 42.3%. So what exactly is the legality of all this? Can you just slap based on a true story on anything? The short answer is yes, but you could also be held liable for it.
Legally, we all have a right under the First Amendment to tell a truthful story. So if that story is truthful, which if you don't have the rights to that person, we have to make extra special care to make sure that it is, you don't need any rights from that individual. And then, well, why get them? And there's a whole lot of good reasons. One is to reduce liability. You know, just because the law is on your side doesn't mean people won't get upset about something or think that they should have gotten their rights acquired.
Because of that, something that you'll see in the end credits of pretty much any movie based on a true story is some variation of this disclaimer saying that any similarity to real people or events is entirely coincidental. It's called Fictitious Person's Disclaimer, which sounds like a Harry Potter spell, and has its origin in 1932, when MGM made a movie about Rasputin and got successfully sued by Princess Irina Alexandrovna of Russia, who claimed that the character of Natasha, who is clearly meant to be her, is defaming her. And as a result, the studio had to pay them almost $3 million adjusted for inflation and further $23 million in an out-of-court settlement. So yeah, the disclaimer got added as a preventative measure, and in general, the studios want to avoid this kind of legal battles.
There is not a single fact about Steve Jobs in this movie that's been distorted, perverted, or invented for the movie. I couldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. Even if I were inclined to do it, the studio's legal department would never let me invent or distort a fact about a real person. You just can't.
So, if you have problem with inaccuracies, a better way of thinking about it would be as inspired by true events. And for the most part, most filmmakers have good intentions. Some people have an amazing passion for accuracy, and others just like having fun with the truth, like turning Abraham Lincoln into a vampire hunter, Quentin Tarantino's alternative history, or more recently, getting creative with biopics. At the end of the day, just make sure to take everything with a grain of salt and remember that it is not meant to be a documentary.